Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into how a truly devastating natural disaster forced a coastal city to fundamentally re-engineer its own geography, making it an absolute pioneer in climate resilience. We're talking about the Great Gale of 1815 and the truly remarkable transformation of Providence, Rhode Island. 14 feet. Note what's really staggering about this number is that it represents an unbroken record. This was the peak of a massive storm surge that completely, unexpectedly, swallowed a thriving colonial port. I mean, just imagine that for a second. 14 feet of churning ocean water suddenly surging right where streets, shops, and homes used to be. So how on earth did a disaster of this magnitude happen so suddenly? Part 1. The setup and the strike. The calm before the chaos. Let's set the scene. It's an eerily humid Saturday morning, September 23, 1815. At this time, Providence is this bustling maritime hub built entirely on the water, literally forged by global trade. You've got ships from Europe and Asia bringing in sugar, textiles, iron. It felt like just another busy morning on the docks. But here is the fatal flaw for a coastal city back then. Early 19th century warning systems basically didn't exist. There are no weather satellites in orbit, no radar sweeping the coast, no digital barometers sending push alerts to your phone, not even a primitive telegraph system to relay messages from down south. The only way these merchants and sailors could predict a storm was by looking up, feeling the wind, and reading the sky. And because they relied entirely on visual cues, they were completely, utterly blind to the 130-mile-per-hour hurricane that was currently accelerating straight up the Atlantic coast, aiming right at them.
And things escalated incredibly fast. To understand why, you kind of need to grasp this concept of a hydraulic piston. You see, a sudden, violent shift in the storm's wind direction turned the natural V-shape of Narragansett Bay into exactly this, a massive, unstoppable hydraulic piston. As the hurricane made landfall, these sudden southeast winds essentially trapped millions upon millions of gallons of ocean water and forced it directly up the narrowing bay. It acted like a geographic funnel that literally weaponized the ocean, compressing it and aiming this massive wall of water straight into the heart of downtown Providence.
Just look at how rapidly this all went down. At 8 a.m., a northeast gale and horizontal rain begins. Initially, sailors and dock workers just batten down the hatches, figuring it's a standard heavy autumn nor'easter. But the situation deteriorates with terrifying speed. By 10 a.m., that catastrophic wind shift to the southeast hits, fully activating that hydraulic piston effect in the bay we just talked about. The winds are howling at hurricane force, literally tearing roofs off buildings. And by midday, just a few hours after the first drop of rain fell, that 14-foot storm surge peaks. What started as a seemingly normal rainstorm had quickly dragged an immense, suffocating dome of ocean water straight into the commercial district.
Part 2. A city in ruins, the catastrophic aftermath. Turns out building a colonial port right at sea level is a pretty massive recipe for disaster. Eyewitnesses in Market Square watched in absolute horror as the sudden inundation burst through floorboards and shattered windows. They actually described the sea rising at a rate of several feet in just a matter of minutes. Within half an hour, the entire bustling commercial district was totally submerged under churning, salty water. People were trapped in the upper floors of their businesses, just helplessly watching their livelihoods wash away. Think about this contrast. In the morning, Providence was a thriving maritime hub. Bustling docks, heavy wooden merchant vessels prepping for global voyages. But by the afternoon, it was a total graveyard of ships. Massive vessels weighing hundreds of tons were plucked directly out of the water and turned into weapons by the storm surge. They were swept upriver like battering rams, shattering the heavy oak pilings of the wharves and completely destroying the Great Bridge, which was the main artery of the city. In just a matter of hours, the ocean had completely reclaimed the land. 500! Every single vessel docked in that harbor, over 500 ships, was either damaged, grounded, or completely destroyed. The sheer force of the storm surge was so incredibly powerful, it left giant, multi-ton, three-masted schooners stranded high and dry right in the middle of cobblestone thoroughfares, just sitting there absurdly between brick buildings miles away from the natural shoreline. It was as if a giant hand had simply picked up the harbor and dropped it right on top of the town. The sheer scale of this devastation impacted absolutely every facet of life in Providence. Infrastructure leveled. Hundreds of buildings were swept away, millions of dollars in commercial goods lost forever in the mud. The environment was equally ravaged. Fresh water wells were completely contaminated with salt water, and those extreme hurricane winds carried sea spray so far inland that crops were scorched and withered, almost like they were burned by fire. But despite this apocalyptic destruction, the casualties tell a totally different story. The death toll was remarkably low. Because this absolute nightmare happened during daylight hours, residents could spot the rapidly rising waters and physically run for their lives, scrambling up the steep incline to the safety of College Hill. The infrastructure was gone, sure, but the communities survived. And because they survived, they had the willpower to do something unprecedented. Rebuild, but entirely on their own terms. Part 3. Redesigning for urban resilience, the re-engineering. Now here is the absolute core of our story. This tragedy didn't just end in ruin. It served as a massive inciting incident for one of the earliest, most aggressive examples of urban climate adaptation in North American history. Providence was about to fundamentally re-engineer its very geography. Rather than just patching up some wooden docks and hoping for the best, city leaders knew they were in a war with the ocean. So they systematically executed 4 specific, monumental engineering choices. First up, strict new building regulations. The days of flimsy wooden waterfront shacks were over. They mandated robust, heavy timber and masonry construction for commercial buildings near the water. Second, they didn't just replace the Great Bridge. They rebuilt a much wider, massively stronger version designed for better water flow, so future storm surges wouldn't turn the bridge into a dam for debris. Third, they heavily reinforced their waterfront wharves, pushing the shoreline out and building deeper, stronger retaining walls. But it's this 4th step that is truly staggering. They systematically brought in earth to fill in the low-lying areas. And remember, we're talking about a time without modern bulldozers or excavators. Relying entirely on horse-drawn carts and grueling manual labor, these citizens literally moved hillsides. They transported thousands of tons of dirt, gravel, and stone down to the waterfront to physically raise the street levels of the commercial core. They literally elevated their geography, lifting the new city foundations several feet higher than the colonial town had been, deliberately putting themselves out of reach of the next 14-foot surge. So, before 1815, Providence was this vulnerable colonial port town at the complete mercy of the tides. But after 1815, through these massive, unified engineering efforts, it transformed into a highly resilient, modern industrial city. This aggressive redesign is actually what paved the way for Providence to become an industrial powerhouse in the 19th century. Instead of just rebuilding exactly what was lost, they built what was needed for the future. They proved that reshaping urban geography to fight the ocean is not just some modern 21st century concept. They successfully modernized their entire economy by respecting the awesome power of the sea, adapting to their geography, and designing a much safer urban environment.
Part 4. Legacy Set in Stone, Remembering the High Water.
Because this was the first major New England hurricane since the year 1635, the incredibly resilient people of Providence wanted to make absolutely sure it served as a permanent, undeniable warning for future generations. As a brilliantly simple early disaster awareness tool, they cut historic brass markers and marble plaques into surviving stone facades, like the iconic Market House. These markers boldly indicated the exact 1815 high water line where that deadly saltwater had crested. They physically embedded these plaques right into ancient brickwork, creating a stark historical benchmark. It was their way of saying, hey, the water reached this high once and it will do it again. You can still walk past these buildings today in downtown Providence, look up above your head, and see exactly where the ocean once ruled the city. Which leaves us with a really critical question. The Great Gale proved that nature can alter human geography in an absolute instant. But the people of Providence proved that a city can rise from the wreckage, re-engineer its very foundations with nothing but manual labor and sheer willpower, and actually rebuild stronger. So I'll leave you with this final, lingering thought to challenge our own modern urban planning. When the next massive storm hits, are our modern cities going to prove as resilient as Providence did way back in 1815? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this sparks a bit of curiosity about the history and the resilience of the cities we live in today.